Good afternoon and welcome everyone to our the Virginia Housing Alliance's 2026 General Assembly Housing Wrap-Up Lunch and Learn. Appreciate you all spending your lunch hour with us today. And I hope that we're able to provide you all with a lot of valuable information about uh, what related to housing was decided and discussed during this most recent state legislative session, and what we can expect to change in our housing law this summer, and what kind of where we are right now moving forward as we continue on in our advocacy efforts. So, thank you all again for coming today. We offer this every year for our members, for anyone connected to our member organization. You all are the folks that we are often advocating on behalf of and working very closely with. So I want to thank you for that support. And we hope that this is very valuable. We want to give you all a very special time to dive deep with us onto these bills. We'll go over um, some of the more key pieces of legislation and the things that were on our legislative agenda. But we really want this space to be valuable for you to ask as many questions as you can think of and to dive into any details that are relevant to the work that you see every day. And give you that time. So we do have an hour. We have a good amount of content, but I'm hoping that this can also be a great space for discussion. So for those who don't know me, my name is Isabel McLean. I'm the Director of Policy and Advocacy here at the Virginia Housing Alliance, and I'm going to pass it off to my somewhat newly added team member who will kind of go into our agenda for the day and set the context. So Charles, I'll pass it off to you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Charles Miller, the somewhat new Policy and Advocacy Associate here at Virginia Housing Alliance. And what I'm going to do now is go over a quick couple of housekeeping things and the agenda for today. So, first off, this event will be recorded, and the slides and recording will be shared with everybody that registered. So, going into the agenda, I'll provide some context about where we are now in the legislative process, that session has wrapped, and what to expect moving forward. Then Isabel will give an overview of key housing-related legislation that passed the General Assembly. This was actually a very active session for housing. There were close to 200 bills related to housing and another 100 budget amendments. So please keep in mind that we were not able to get every single bill, but we are touching on VHA's priorities and what we specifically supported and tracked. At the end, we'll have time to answer any questions about other bills that you were curious about or were not mentioned or discussed, anything else that comes up. So feel free to use the chat to ask any questions. Many of you submitted questions ahead of time that we will try to go over today, and we will make time to go through the questions and open the floor for discussion towards the end. So where are we now? As everyone knows, the session itself officially wrapped on March 14th, known as Sine Die, and then the governor had until April 13th to respond to any of the bills passed by the General Assembly. And we just wrapped up with reconvened session, which took place April 22nd. That's usually about 6 weeks after the main session wraps. There was a special reconvene this year since the General Assembly did not pass a budget by the end of regular session where they briefly met on the 23rd to resolve the differences, but did not yet reach an agreement. So unfortunately, there still isn't any news on the budget, but we will update our internal one-pagers as soon as we know something. Um, so moving on to what to expect going forward, everything that we talk about that has passed will either go on into effect July 1st unless there is a delayed enactment. And for any of the bills that the governor did propose amendments to that the General Assembly did not accept all of, or rejected, then the governor has an extra 30 days to respond to that, either signing the bill into law or vetoing it. So I'll now pass it off to Isabel.
Great, thank you. Um, yeah, so where we are right now, because we're past reconvene session, for the most part, most of the bills that I'll be talking about today, um, are set to become law. They've been signed now by the governor, or if the governor did offer any amendments to them, the General Assembly has, for the most part, accepted those and moved forward. There were not a ton of huge changes made to housing bills that have left any of these bills kind of remaining. There's been a couple. I will mention a few of them today, but for the most part, where we are right now with legislation is we kind of know what's passed and when it will go into effect. If you've been paying attention to the headlines for just other issue topics in the General Assembly, you'll know that's maybe not the case for everything, but at least for housing, we know more or less what's moving forward. And like Charles said, what will become law this July 1st. All right, you can press the next, Charles. All right, so as Charles said, I'm not going to go over all 200 bills, but I will be focusing on especially those that were on our legislative agenda this year and those that we supported and closely tracked. I've divided them into a couple different categories just for the sake of organization and the way that we've been thinking about them. We've got a category for tools for preservation of affordable housing. We've got a category for tools for affordability, tools for supply of housing, and tools for stability, housing stability. So I'm going to go through these. Again, I want to make sure we have time at the end, so I'm not going to go into a ton of detail about each of these items, but we can always circle back later if you do want more of that detail. And as Charles said, the recording, the slides, also our handy dandy one pager that we have will be shared out too for further details and reference if you'd like. But yeah, starting here with tools for preservation. There were two bills passed this year that we have been working on and supporting for several years now. You'll see that that's actually a pretty common trend. Part of the reason why there were close to 200 bills introduced this session is because there have been many that almost got past the finish line in the past few years, but were vetoed by the previous governor. And so there's a little bit of a buildup, kind of a bottleneck here, where there's several bills that reintroduced now and many that did finally make it across the finish line. The first one of these is HB4 that you see here on your screen. This has been one of VHA's top priorities for the past 3 years. This is our third year working on it. We worked with Delegate, now Senator Bennett Parker, each of those years. This is a critical bill that gives localities another tool in order to preserve what multifamily subsidized housing we have right now. If we are going to make progress towards addressing our very huge gap and our huge need of affordable housing, we have to also preserve what we currently have. And as you see here with some of the facts on this slide, we are facing a huge wave of affordable units coming to the end of their affordability restrictions. So most programs for affordable housing have a specific timeline, usually 30 years, that those restrictions are required for affordability. And we are seeing that many of these units, close to over 17,000 in Virginia over the next 5 years, could be coming to an end. There could be plans in place to continue some of those for sure, but we absolutely need more tools to be able to respond to this wave and preserve this affordable housing. So this bill gives localities the power to establish what's called a right of first refusal for subsidized rental properties when they are coming towards the end of their affordability restrictions. This means that a locality or a designated partner, so it could be a nonprofit, for-profit partner, anyone that they work with, when a property that is nearing the end of its affordability restrictions is being sold and it's being sold to a buyer who's not going to continue affordability, the locality or their qualified partner could intervene, could match that third-party offer. And then by doing that, they're exercising that right of first refusal, meaning that that property would then go to them, who would continue that affordability moving forward. So it gives them a tool. It's a very limited intervention in the private transaction. We've worked really hard to how to do what we could to ensure that this is really targeted to that preservation. And we're really excited to see it go across the finish line this year. So this will go into effect, as is most of the bills here, July 1st this summer. And I will just say, because this has been one of our top priority items, say a little bit more about this. The Virginia Housing Alliance is working right now on coming up with a plan for outreach to localities and potentially some training on how best to set up an ordinance and establish this authority and how best to use a right of first refusal and what would be helpful for localities. We're also working with a coalition of many of you on this call and potentially part of that. To to have greater tools for tracking this affordable housing, where it is, and when the expiration dates um, are coming, so that we can better be prepared and utilize this tool. I do see there's a quick question, what makes properties eligible as subsidized? It basically means any property that received public assistance and has an income restriction or affordability restriction tied to it. We did specifically name programs for the sake of making that really clear what properties apply, but that's the general definition. And it has to be multifamily rental properties of 10 units or more, if you want to get into the details of it.
Isabel, can I ask one other quick question?
Sure.
Um, I probably should have paid attention to this before, but I didn't. What is is it in any time in its compliance period that it goes up for sale, or is it sort of time limited related to the end of its compliance period?
It's a really great question. For what we've passed right now as a first step, it is limited to the end within the last 2 years of the affordability restrictions. I will say that yes, we've been working on this 3 years, and I already have a lot of ideas for step two and step three, and wish that we could have passed this sooner so we could already be changing that and making it broader. But this is the first step. So it is a little bit limited, but we're hoping that this will still be used, and it definitely will still be a valuable tool. But yeah, it is limited to those last 2 years. Alrighty, the next bill on here, House Bill 375. This is also really important for preservation and something that we've been following and supporting. This gives a residents of manufactured home parks and localities as well a right of first refusal, specifically for manufactured home parks when they're being sold. This is really important because this is a more naturally occurring a form of affordable housing and is also very vulnerable. And we've seen many of our parks disappear over the past several years, and absolutely need more mechanisms here to preserve this really important form of affordable housing. Really excited to see this go through this year as well. Again, feel free to ask questions as they come up, in the chat, but we can also take time and come back to this later. I just realized that if I continue on each slide with how much time I've taken on this one, we might not make it to the end. So I'll try to go a little bit faster, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't, drop a question in the chat when you think of it, and we'll get to it later. All right, next slide, Charles. Oh, go back one, I think. There we go. Alrighty, so tools for affordability. Another bill that we've been working on for many years is this first one, Senate Bill 74, or House Bill 867. This is related to the authority that localities have to establish inclusionary zoning programs, or what's called in our code affordable dwelling unit ordinances. Currently, about 7 localities have the broad flexibility to implement these programs how they need, tailored to their jurisdictions, whereas the rest of the localities have kind of 2 different code sections that are a bit convoluted, explaining all the sort of prescriptions that a locality can do, and not really giving many of them flexibility to actually tailor it to be the most effective for their own regions and their own jurisdictions. And so we've been pushing for this for a long time. This gives now that this bill is passed, all localities will have more of that flexibility and that authority. They will be able to establish both mandatory inclusionary zoning programs or just incentive-based inclusionary zoning programs. So this basically means that they can incentivize and set up a program for what those incentives should be, or mandate and include incentives with those that new development have certain number of affordable unit set-asides. This is not, we're not talking huge amounts of affordable units, but just ensuring that any new development does have some piece of affordability baked into it. And so we think this will be a really important tool. Again, it's something else for localities to take advantage of, and we'll be doing some outreach to them this summer, along with the right of first refusal bill to make sure that folks know that this is a new tool that they have and try to connect them to experts to figure out best practices. I will say this bill does have a delayed enactment. It won't go into effect until July 1st of next year. But mainly, I don't think this will be a problem because localities will need to take the time to do research and figure out and plan and do stakeholder engagement on what type of program, what this would look like for them. So I don't think any localities at least that I know of, are ready July 1st, 2026 to hit the ground running with a ordinance proposed to use this authority. But the fact of the matter is the bill does have a delayed enactment, so they will have to wait until next year to officially pass an ordinance and use this. The next bill on here is one that we worked on, and this was actually the first year we worked on it. But it's addressing an issue we've heard about for many, many years and have discussed with folks in the affordable housing space. Right now, the General Assembly has granted localities the authority to decide for themselves if they want to establish full or partial property tax abatements for property owned by nonprofits. However, due to the ownership structure of what's required by most affordable housing programs, like the low-income housing tax credit program, owned by a nonprofit is not very straightforward. And so many localities did not see that this authority could apply to affordable housing. And so most affordable housing does not have property tax exemptions baked in from the beginning. There are real creative ways that localities have gone around this, and I'll mention another bill that expands one of those other tools, like for the performance grant program, if you're familiar with that one. But this is really important because by establishing an ordinance from the very beginning and having this be a very predictable form of support that we know that this property could have a property tax abatement, that can actually unlock greater capital from the very beginning. And so what this does is it just clarifies that authority given to localities and to say that that can apply to nonprofit controlled affordable housing, recognizing that affordable housing, there are for-profit investors that are a part of that ownership structure, but as long as a nonprofit has a controlling interest in the managing member or general partner of that ownership structure, for affordable housing, that can count for this sort of nonprofit property tax abatement. So we're really excited about this. This could have a really huge impact. And again, we'll be educating and really encouraging localities to take advantage of this as a tool, as a way to support affordable housing when many localities don't have, the straight subsidies or cash to support a project, but this could be a really important way to do that. Next up, we have a bill introduced by Delegate Carr that is addressing an issue, we've heard for many years about delays in award notifications for the Housing Trust Fund, our largest source of state funding and investment in affordable housing and in our homeless response system. So this bill establishes that DHCD must award applicants of the Housing Trust Fund programs, both the Competitive Loan Program or ASNH and the Homeless Reduction Grant programs, within 90 days of application. However, it's a little bit complicated, and I think it's because the General Assembly didn't feel comfortable telling DHCD exactly how much time they need to respond to applications, but still wanted to communicate to them that there needs to be a more reasonable timeline for that response, and that awardees must be notified before a public announcement, that this doesn't need to get held up by a press release from the governor, that awardees should be notified before that. And so what the General Assembly decided to do is that they've set this 90-day timeline through July of next summer, July 2027, but then established that DHCD must engage stakeholders and create those timing guidelines for the future moving on. So we'll definitely keep track of this and try to be a part of that discussion and figure out what that timeline should be moving forward. But I still think this is really important for communicating that there does need to be a reasonable timeline, and that folks need to have that information as soon as they can. The last bill on this slide is one that's been referred to as Faith in Housing, or Yes in God's Backyard, a bill that many advocates of some of our partners have been working on for a couple years now. And this bill was officially passed and signed by the governor. And there's a lot more details to it that I won't go into today, but essentially it sets up a pathway for by right development of affordable housing on land that's owned by faith-based or religious organizations or a certain list of eligible tax exempt nonprofit organizations. These are specific organizations that the General Assembly designated as tax exempt before before 2003 when they decided to actually leave that up to localities moving forward. So this is a list that won't get added to, but it's very specific. It includes organizations like Habitat for Humanity. Um, but this is really addressed to specifically land also owned by faith-based organizations. And so there's certain affordability requirements. There's a lot of other details to what this looks like and how, a lot of questions about height and infrastructure and things like that. But for the sake of today, I won't go into all those details. Just exciting to see this pass. It will go into effect. It has a delayed enactment till next January 1st of next year. And there is a 5-year sunset on it. So they're kind of looking at this. Let's see how this plays out over those next 5 years, and see kind of with that information how they want to move forward. So it does technically expire on January 1st of 2031. All right, next slide. All right, I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but there was a bill introduced by Delegate Thomas that clarifies that any locality can take advantage of what's been referred to as the performance grant programs. If you're in Richmond, you're likely familiar with this, but this basically is authority that a locality's economic development or industrial authority can have, where they can establish a program that essentially reimburses the property taxes of affordable properties as a way to support them and kind of move forward. Again, this was in a lot of ways a creative tool to work around the limitations for what authority localities had to do property tax exemptions, but this is really effective to encourage and incentivize affordable housing. But it's not just of affordable housing through low-income housing tax credits, but just across the board to try to have another incentive to include affordable units in developments. So this is just clarifying that any locality can do this, and setting up some clear guidelines for how they can do that. Delegate Thomas and Senator Jones also had another bill related to our ceiling of state private activity bonds. I've had a conversation with some of you on this call about this. It's a bit technical, but it's raising that ceiling that can be issued of those bonds that can be issued to housing. Right now, it's at 57% that can go towards housing, but now that's going to be raised to 67%. And specifically, Virginia Housing would get 50% of those and local housing authorities 17%. So this is just unlocking and increasing the amount that this is an important source of capital for affordable housing, and just recognizing that we need to adapt this to respond to our growing housing needs. Another bill here is one that again gives localities another tool. This is not a requirement, but it just clarifies that a locality can, by ordinance, have a separate kind of special fast-tracked process to approve rezoning applications for affordable housing development. So saying that there can be separate consideration and a separate ordinance that sets up that faster process when it comes to affordable housing. Because many localities weren't entirely sure if they had that authority yet, and so this clarifies that they can. But again, they would have to choose to pass an ordinance to be able to do this. The last bill on here is one that was introduced by Senator Williams Graves, also related to taxes, and another kind of enabling bill for localities. But it basically says that this kind of ties into the authority that many localities already have to do partial property tax exemptions for rehabilitation and kind of residential homes. And so this basically clarifies that you could also offer a property tax exemption for converting underused properties like strip malls, office spaces, etc., into residential units with affordable set aside. So saying that this can also that sort of conversion rehabilitation approach that can also apply to when you're converting underused properties into residential, as long as they are affordable set-asides. So again, another great tool for encouraging affordability. Next slide. All right, moving on to supply. This is still very closely related to affordability, um, but I had to try to find a way to organize all of these mini bills. The first one here, we're really excited about. This was actually the first year that it was introduced and it passed. It establishes that manufactured homes and manufactured modular homes are permitted use in single-family residential zones all across Virginia. So basically equating them with stick-built homes in such zones. This is really important because manufactured modular housing can be a more affordable way to build homes. And so this can hopefully help reduce some of the costs if we're continuing to only build stick-built homes in single-family residential zones. And this means that there's no longer a need to have specific zoning only for manufactured housing, that's not necessary, that manufactured housing can be built into other residential zones. So this is going to be really excited. We're excited to see where this goes. And there's been a lot of exciting development in manufactured and modular homes over the past several years. So that was really huge. Another bill that passed this year, this one we have seen for several years, related to accessory dwelling units or ADUs. I know that I mentioned a different ADU when I said affordable dwelling unit ordinances when I was referring to the inclusionary zoning bill, but this is a different ADU acronym. So I just want to clarify that because it can be confusing to many people. It's confusing to me every single time I get to this, that we have two housing related ADU acronyms. But this accessory dwelling units, this refers to kind of like granny flats or carriage homes, kind of small apartments above a garage, etc. So this is trying to allow for greater density and different types of housing within single-family residential zones. So this requires all localities to include accessory dwelling units as a permitted use, to have that incorporated in their zoning for single-family residential areas. There are certain limitations and flexibility for localities to kind of determine what that looks like, but this does require that they have that and that they allow ADUs in some form. There is a delayed enactment for this as well for July of next year. Another bill that is related to supply that our partners worked on is looking at parking minimums. This bill started as much broader, but it got narrowed down throughout the General Assembly process. So this specifically now only applies to transit corridors, so areas with public transit. And it basically reduces the amount of parking that localities can require for residential, multifamily, or mixed-use developments in those areas. Trying to, the argument is that the market itself should determine what amount of parking is appropriate, and that this can often drive up costs for housing development unnecessarily. I will say that there were some amendments to this that the governor offered, and it looks like right now there's still some question for exactly how this will be interpreted and what specific areas it applies to. Basically, as far as what I know, that there's still a couple terms like what is high capacity transit and what is a building or enhanced structure within a transit stop. Those sort of things have to be defined by DRPT to really fully understand what areas this applies to. But it's still an interesting step in that direction of trying to reduce regulations that might not align with the market and with need. And then the last thing on here is an interesting bill that passed that ended up looking different after the governor made a few amendments to it. But essentially, the goal of this was to try to have a public housing development database that DHCD manages and updates annually to provide information about the number of proposed and approved applications for residential development, the average approval timeline for those applications, and the number of affordable units and further kind of information about affordable units in each locality. This now is set up where localities are required to send these reports each year to DHCD. but it's a little bit unclear what exactly that will look like, what the enforcement will be. But the purpose is then for DHUD to take this information and make it publicly accessible in a database. I don't think it will really say where that affordable housing is exactly, but there is an important piece in there asking about details on what income restrictions are tied to those affordable units and when those income restrictions are to expire. So this could help give us some helpful information about many pieces that'd be really important to know, how long it's taking for housing to get approved, where it's getting, how much is getting approved, and also to have a better understanding of where we are with affordability and when and how many units may expire soon. All right, next slide. Okay. We're now at the last category of tools for stability. So these are often focused on kind of tenant rights and how to invest in more housing stability for folks when they're to prevent kind of displacement. Um, so several of these bills may be familiar to you all because again, they've been introduced over the past several years, many vetoed, but are now across the finish line. The first of these is a bill that grants localities the authority to sue landlords. Specifically, this has been kind of phrased as the authority to sue slumlords, that localities also have that standing to pursue them in court for failure to maintain fit and habitable conditions, giving them another way, beyond just fining and sort of things like that, that to enforce habitability conditions, and so that it gives localities another way to address and hold slumlords accountable. And this is also important so it's not just only on the tenants that live there who, may be very busy dealing with the impact of those inhabitable conditions, and instead someone else, like the locality, can seek justice for them on their behalf. The next bill is another one very similar. They've been kind of grouped together. This is giving tenants greater time to catch back up on rent before an eviction process is started. This is often referred to as the pay or quit period, the mandatory waiting period before a landlord can start the eviction process after a tenant hasn't paid rent. So right now it's a 5-day period. If you don't pay your rent on the first day of the month, by the 5th day, the landlord can start the eviction process. But now that is 14 days. So this gives tenants more time to catch up and actually enough time to get a paycheck, so that they have a better chance to prevent it. We know that it's much more affordable and much more likely to prevent displacement if tenants are able to catch up before the eviction process is even started. Then it starts to get a lot more expensive. The last bill on this slide is also really important for our kind of trying to give tenants more rights within our landlord-tenant law. Right now, we do not have what's often referred to as a warranty of habitability, but that can be kind of a confusing and legal term for folks that aren't familiar. What that really means is that right now, if I'm a tenant who hasn't paid my rent, I'm in court for non-payment of rent because I fell behind, I cannot raise and say, well, a part of this issue is that the landlord also has not been keeping up with their side of the contract, that there's habitability concerns. I can't stay in this place. It's not livable for me. Oftentimes it's been more expensive to live in an inhabitable home, so maybe they are using their rent payment to go stay in a hotel, etc. But right now, that cannot be considered and incorporated into the case about non-payment of rent. It cannot be raised as a defense. This is a real issue of just equity to justice. This is the only sort of contract situation where you can't raise and consider the fact that the other party has failed on their end to keep up with the contract, that only your side of not fulfilling that contract is being considered. And so it's just evening that out, especially because when a judge is determining, okay, well, what rent is owed to be able to stay in this home, they might need to consider the habitability conditions and say that that might actually reduce the amount of rent owed, or take into consideration the impact of that. So this is really important. It's a bit into kind of legal details that I'm not a lawyer to go into all of, but this is really exciting and a really good move for us to provide kind of basic protections for tenants in our landlord-tenant law. Moving on to the next slide. Alrighty. Um, we have two different eviction programs here in Virginia. It can be a little bit confusing. The first one is what's called an eviction diversion program. And this is one that is tied to our court system and essentially sets up a process for tenants who are facing eviction to go on a payment plan instead and hopefully divert from that eviction. And it's done in partnership through our court system. Right now, it's not used nearly as much as it could be. And a lot of that has to do with some pretty strenuous eligibility conditions, just a lack of awareness, etc. And so this was brought up last year in the Housing Commission, and many stakeholders worked together to try to find some improvements to make this more accessible. So they've reduced some of the stringent eligibility conditions that make it a little bit more usable, actually, so more folks could actually be eligible for it. Reduces some of the burdensome requirements and sets in place a system where any tenant should be made aware of this program. The other eviction program that we have is the Eviction Reduction Program, or VERP. And this is not just setting up a process for a payment plan, but this actually comes with funding for rental assistance to prevent eviction. We've had this as kind of a pilot for several years now, and it's been funded at about $3 million a year. Very effective where it is used, but it's only used in a few areas of the state. And so there's been a lot of effort to codify this, to officially make this program a part of our state code and to expand it. And so that's what this does. This makes this a permanent program, and combined with some budget amendments to increase it, there's an effort to make this available in more areas across the state and provide more of this eviction prevention money. The last bill I'll mention on here is one that has some governor amendments that were rejected from the General Assembly, and so I'm not entirely sure how the governor will respond to that. Some of the amendments were accepted, some were rejected, and so technically, like Charles said earlier, the governor has another 30 days to decide if she was going to veto this bill or let it pass into law or sign it. So we'll see what happens, but essentially this bill was put into place to require larger landlords to offer a payment plan to tenants who, along with a written notice of non-payment of rent and some kind of guidelines for what that payment plan must look like. This has a delayed enactment if it does go into law, and it does also require DHCD to create to offer some example payment plan options so that landlords have that on hand and can know what to reference. All right, next slide. Cool. That is all of the bills. I know I ran through that really, really fast, but I want to make sure we have time to dive into what is specifically important to you and what you're curious about. I saw that there were a couple more questions in the chat, so we'll get to that. But I will wrap up with consideration of our state budget and kind of where we are there. So as Charles said earlier, we do not yet have a state budget. They adjourned without one. But if you go to the next slide, we know at least what was included in the bill that passed the House and the bill that passed the Senate. Now, they have not passed and figured out a bill that resolves the differences between each chamber. And once they do that, we'll have a much better idea about what the final budget could look like, but that will also be sent to the governor, and the governor will have a chance to respond to that as well, too. So we still have a few more steps along the way. But it is important to know kind of what's still on the table right now for housing, and we should be encouraged. There were included in both chamber budget bills some significant increases for housing, and so those are definitely still on the table right now. For example, significant increases to the Housing Trust Fund, $12.5 million in the House bill, $50 million in the Senate bill. I will say just a piece that I didn't quite mention this piece of legislation earlier, but it becomes relevant here, that there was a bill some bills introduced that would set up a revolving loan fund, kind of set up a pilot to provide a revolving loan fund for mixed income housing. And initially, the language in that was going to take some funding from the Housing Trust Fund for this. So as you could see in the Senate bill, budget bill, they incorporated that in their ask for the Housing Trust Fund and indicated that this revolving loan fund pilot would be used for that. We advocated at the Virginia Housing Alliance against this because for many, many reasons, let's not take away from our one source of housing when we absolutely need affordable housing. We can create more funds, more programs with other money. But also, it just would not work. That the Housing Trust Fund is very much dedicated to low income housing. And so, just for logistics of having that support mixed income housing can get complicated. And in general, when we need greater subsidy right now that we have more access to debt, and especially with expansions to the low-income housing tax program federally, we need more grant-like or subsidy-like sources, which essentially the loans through the Housing Trust Fund can be considered that as a 30-year forgivable mortgage. And so we don't want to take funding from something like a source like this sort of subsidy like investment and turn it into debt right now either. So I can get more technical on all of that, but this bill did pass, but the version that the governor just signed does not fund it with the Housing Trust Fund. So that's a big win for us that'll be separate funding. And so that'll be considered in what we see in the budget. But hopefully there'll still be a 50 million increase for it for the trust fund. There's also included here additional funding for homeless services. That's been a top priority for us and continues to be as we're facing a lot of uncertainty to federal dollars for homelessness and specifically for supportive housing. That's a big, big push here. And as I said earlier, there's increases to the Virginia Eviction Reduction Program and some small increases to a rental assistance program administered by DPHDS for adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities. All right, moving on to the next one, and then we basically almost have 15 minutes for a discussion, which is what I wanted. The last thing I'll mention is just continuing priorities. There were many bills that didn't make it this year, but the one that I really wanted to highlight for you all is this was one of our top priorities on our agenda and will continue to be next year. This is something really important that we'll continue working on. We called this our Right to Rest bill. Essentially, it is trying to put some guardrails on how localities can respond to people experiencing homelessness in public places, trying to prevent overcriminalization here. And so I clarify that people experiencing homelessness have a right to rest and engage in life-sustaining activities like resting, sleeping, sheltering from the elements, etc., in publicly owned and accessible places. They have a right to access those places just as much as anyone else, as long as they're not, creating access issues or safety hazard. I mean, just as much as that applies to anyone else, that they have a right to be there and they cannot be criminalized simply for doing that in a public place. This is really important. Unfortunately, the bill was continued to next year and with a letter to the Housing Commission. So we're going to continue working on that. But please keep an eye out for that. And if you are interested in working with us on this in the future, let me know. Alrighty. Last thing I'll say is we do have two other resources. If there are bills that I didn't mention today that you're curious about, that you know of, or if you want to see the other 200, almost 200 ones, we have a legislative tracker on our website still that has all of that you can access and take a deeper dive into. And then I also mentioned this earlier. On the next slide, Charles can show that we have a one-pager that very succinctly summarizes the top bills that we mentioned today that is accessible on our website, and will be emailed out to everyone who registered today too. So you have a very quick and easy material to reference for what is set to become laws this summer. Alrighty, well, that is all I have for you. We can now move to questions. Charles, you can stop sharing your screen and we can kind of open it up. I know that there were several questions in the chat that I can look at, but also feel free to just jump off mute and ask your questions.
Isabel, this is Matt Engel again. Sorry, I had a question earlier about a couple of the land use bills, like particularly the faith and housing bill. Is this another piece of sort of authorizing legislation that leaves it up to the municipality to sort of modify their zoning code, or does it in fact just allow churches to build by right?
So it's the second option. This is not one of the enabling tools. This does establish that it is by right. So localities do not have to pass an ordinance for this. It'll go into effect next year. I think January 1st of 2027 was the delayed for this one. And that will be in effect for the entire state.
And in terms of the non-religious organizations, tax-exempt nonprofits, could you repeat again what those are?
Yes, and I can actually I can put in the chat and we can provide this a link to the specific code section that defines this and the
Hmm.
list of those. It's about 19 nonprofits. And the confusing element of this is that it doesn't apply to all nonprofits. This was so before 2020 or 2003, when the General Assembly ratified the Constitution, the General Assembly actually designated which nonprofits or which property owned by which nonprofits would be tax exempt. But then they decided in 2003, when in the Constitution, that actually should be up to localities. And so ever since then, the General Assembly is not added to this list, but it is still a list that applies statewide. And so that is the list that is referred to in the Faith and Housing Bill. So it's a very limited number of nonprofits. So for the most majority, this really is applying to land owned by religious organizations. But Habitat for Humanity is one of these tax exempt nonprofits, as is several others. So I can put in the chat that list
Right.
so that you can see that. Our partners at CHC made a really great just kind of one pager that lists what those are. So I'll put that in the chat.
A couple I could just summarize them rather than you having to read my probably with typos. But at first, just amazing work that you all did internally to draft all those summaries and to track everything. I know it was incredibly impactful for the folks that went to Richmond and the folks who are in Richmond. And I had no idea the amount of work that went into all of that. For the ROFR thing and the group that's forming on drafting kind of enabling documents, or I would definitely recommend working with localities that we know have exercised ROFRs. I know Fairfax has some scar tissue and some success with Matt and others on exercising them, and just like how much time it takes and how to pre-approve folks. If that's the coalition, I can reconnect with them to see if I can help with that fund.
Mhm.
And I know now it's time to just celebrate. And I know that's probably why Sunshine just asked questions and didn't make any comments. But on that ROFR and that 2-year period, you clearly know that's going to be such a limiting factor.
Oh yeah.
And it's going to be a sieve with a lot of big holes for projects because these folks that don't care about preservation are buying properties very early on now and waiting out the clock, which is amazing. I was just curious if the folks who are like Housing Forward and other folks who are working on the tracker, is that tracker going to also, because we rarely actually fine tune it to say the 2-year clock, to fine tune it to that. Not because we want to just highlight all these things, but more to highlight what's getting missed. So ideally, I can see your wheels already turning about an
Yes.
amendment in 2027 to broaden that.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, just making sure that we're feeding with data. If we think that the assembly next year will require that, to make sure we're thinking, whoever's gathering that data. And then just another reiterating an offer when we were working on the tax abatement legislation, that we knew that we put a lot of bells and whistles into our draft, and we didn't get every bell and whistle into their draft. But we knew that because of that, the ordinance by the locality would be very important to make sure it was strengthened for kind of the financeability of the tax abatement. So I've offered before, and I'm offering again to kind of draft what that form should look like, the white paper, how it would work. I think we would need a finance person, just anyone better with numbers than I am, which is probably anybody, but just to help them help a locality see how to calculate it. But
Absolutely.
let me know when that I would love to have that kind of ready on July 2nd, but like that may not be
Yeah.
very realistic. But if folks want to, I would need other people because I'm sure anything I do would be pretty flawed. But if you think that if there are folks that want to jump into that, I am reiterating my offer to take some of
Well,
my leisure time for that.
well, we'll definitely take you up on that. That's awesome, and I really appreciate it. We're figuring out our plan for all of that right now, and I would love to dive more into that with you. And yeah, if you want to give up some pickleball time and help us write that, we would take you up on that.
That's great. I seem to be getting worse at pickleball, so it's probably a good
Okay,
move.
well, good. But absolutely, appreciate anyone's thoughts and support on kind of this next stage of now these bills have passed and how can we make sure that this authority is used and these tools are used. So really appreciate that.
And one last plug, only because I always do these shameless plugs for VHA, is how do we make sure that the folks that wind up using them know where they came from and know
Yeah,
that they should be paying it forward or subsidizing the group that is actually making this happen? I feel like
yeah.
the Virginia is unfortunately replete with free riders, and I don't know how you make that so, but I'll think about it whenever we draft how to put a
Well,
binding clause that they have to become a sponsor or something.
and you have to send a thank you note to Virginia Housing Alliance. Uh,
Yes.
no,
Hey,
I love
Isabel, I
that.
have a question that has
Mhm.
unfortunately nothing to do with what Eric was bringing up, which, because I liked that track that we were on, but it's actually just kind of a clarifying technical question. Um, for HB 281, the warranty of habitability
Mhm.
bill, does that line up with the VRLTA or like the basic habitability list that different COCs use? Like, I'm wondering what, if any, relation it has to DHCD fronted habitability checklists. And like, are they going to be the ones to like also kind of provide support in those cases? I don't know. I'm just curious.
Yeah, so this you said HB 281. Yeah, the warranty compatibility one. Yeah, so this actually it doesn't have anything to do with what habitability standards are. It's just saying that if I'm being sued for non-payment of rent, I can raise a defense and say I'm arguing that the landlord has also not been kept or hasn't been keeping up with their side of the bargain, and that I could argue, hey, I don't think I'm living in habitable conditions. The judge then would then determine if that's true, and that would all be considered. But right now, that can't even be considered or brought as a defense. And so what this is doing is just saying that it can be. So what actually is determined, that would be generally, or what actually is habitable or not, that would be debated throughout all of it as is normal when there's like kind of more of a tenant's assertion case, when that's when a
Hmm.
tenant who has paid up rent can then, bring their landlord to court and say this, they haven't been keeping up with their side of the bargain. It would be the same sort of consideration, but it's just saying that that doesn't have to be a separate process and it's not excluded from you if you are behind on rent yourself.
Perfect. Yeah, I just wanted to know if there was kind of like a master text that they could look back to be like, and here's like the Virginia statewide established measures of living in a habitable space. Because we see like,
Gotcha.
there's not really like a standardized list present for like, especially like smaller landlords. There are horror stories. There's also just like things that people don't know,
Yeah.
and you hear people like primarily utilizing space heaters instead of like a centralized heating
Mhm.
system, but that goes against like DHCD's habitability. But I didn't know if that like carried. Yeah, it sounds like that's going to be something
Yeah,
that's going to need to be defended case by case
I
or
think
illustrated.
so. As far as I know, I mean, in our landlord tenant law, I think there's like a very basic level of what is considered like habitable. Like there was actually a bill that I didn't mention here that added AC to that list of
Yeah.
kind of required habitable conditions, but it's only if you already had central AC when like advertised for the unit before and it breaks and then you don't have AC anymore. That is kind of what's considered part of it. Um, so it's kind of a nuanced little technical bill that I decided not to include on here, but there is some form of that, but I don't know, like you said, I don't know, I'm not familiar with what DHCD has or if there's kind of other varying lists of what is considered habitable or how that is defined. So I'd have to talk to our kind of tenant right expert lawyers on that to know more about what you're talking about. But I don't think this necessarily
Sorry.
impacts that. I think, that would be determined as it is figured out right now anyways. It's just saying that it could be considered. So, so I can follow up. I mean,
Documented.
if you want,
Yeah.
like, I do think VPLC or the Legal Aid Justice Center might have more of an answer to your question about like a centralized kind of agreed upon definition of habitability.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Oh yeah, like Shuri said, using the HUD ones now, but I don't know. Does anyone have any other questions? And I can stay a little bit later too. I know it's already 12:57, but if people have questions, this time is for you and we can stay on.
Yeah, just thank you so much. This has been really, really helpful.
Yeah, of
And a
course.
lot got passed. Yay.
I know, definitely a lot got passed.
Is there
Absolutely.
on the budgets? Is there anything left for you all to do, or is it now just in the murky, dark chambers of?
It's mostly in the murky, dark. Yeah, it is very frustrating how incredibly non-transparent our budget process is. Uh, Housing is not the thing that's keeping up negotiations. It's related to data centers, actually, is really what's keeping these negotiations from moving forward. But that's because they're technically debating on having an additional $1 billion plus on the table or not. So it's pretty impactful. So it could impact, their ability to have additional investments to housing, but the actual question of housing is not the debate. So we're just trying to keep housing in their minds, have them not forget about it. But I don't know what's already been decided. They could have already decided things and just said, once we figure out the data center, we know what we've agreed on with housing. But I just don't know that. And that's not for the public to see until they show us that final bill.
Transparency.
I know.
All right, great. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Isabel. This was great.
Of course, I'm glad it was helpful.
Have a good
Thanks,
day.
Isabel.
You as well. Yeah. If anyone also had a question that they asked ahead of time, I know there are a few. I think we addressed most of them. Folks asked for just, some things about other supply bills or landlord-tenant laws that I think I tried to cover most of those. But someone did also ask about high E funding and kind of Reggie that I didn't quite get to. That I'll just put in here. That's for the recording for other people who may be watching this later. That we do have a plan to rejoin Reggie. Apparently, there's supposed to be a path forward for that and to start generating revenue through Reggie again at the end of May, even. But where that leaves for how much funding we have right now in the coffers for high E, I'm not entirely sure, but I don't think very much. And so there's maybe a question of whether there will be funding for high E in this next ASNH round. But moving forward, that we will start getting more funding through Reggie, and then there will be funds available for high E. So there's a question of maybe not very much this year, if any, but we will again have that for years moving forward. Did anyone else have any other questions? Yeah, I can stay on and answer anything. No? Well, I'll just say keep an eye out. We'll share updates when the state budget, when we have more information there, and we'll update our one pager that's available on our website for all of that. And don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions. We're here for you and happy to discuss anything that went on at the General Assembly. Thank you so much.